Hi everyone, it's Jahanara here, or Jahara. Um, if you watched my first video, then you'll know that I'm on the autism spectrum. And as well as raising awareness of living with autism, I wanted to share the experiences and knowledge that I have about writing and other interests. And today I'd like to do that in the form of telling you the story of my writing journey. So, ever since I can remember, I have had stories in my head, um, and characters just living in my head. I guess for me, it was a way of dealing with a world that I didn't understand or fit, and maybe even escaping situations over which I had no control. It was my world, my imaginary world, and that was my coping strategy. I found that stories came to me as fragments of a picture or snippets of dialogue, like a movie playing in my head. There were these awesome, lifelike, colourful characters who had their own backstories. And along with that, of course, were the emotions. Sometimes they came in gentle waves, but often they would be an overwhelming tsunami that would completely engulf me, or enwrap itself around me like a suffocating blanket. As I grew older, these snippets of pictures, words, and emotions just got more and more complex and intense. I often struggle to recreate what was in my head, and my emotions have always been my kryptonite. I later learned that that was part of being on the spectrum. It was something that I was never very good at, interpreting emotions. When I'm feeling unwell, for example, I can never verbalize why that is. Obviously, I know the obvious symptoms, like I feel dizzy or I feel sick or being sick. But for anything else, I just had pictures about drowning in broken glass and struggling to move because it was painful, with shards of glass spiking me and poking me at every movement. So yeah, I used to get a few weird looks whenever I answered, whenever anyone asked me, so how are you feeling today? Um, but at school, I had the chance of writing my stories, but I was never very good at writing. I wasn't a good writer because there was so much that I didn't understand. For example, one time, as a writing exercise, we had to write two pieces of prose, two paragraphs, one to be written in proper written English, and the other paragraph should say exactly the same thing but in colloquial language or slang. My two pieces were identical. I just didn't get it. And that was just one of the many things that I didn't get. So, although I loved creative writing and writing my stories at school, I didn't really get into it then. For me, it was just yet another thing that I was no good at. And later I learned that was all part of being on the spectrum. Throughout my life, though, my stories and characters have never left me. They were always there, and later in my life, I would attempt to write whatever I could understand, which very often was not very much at all. I went through this cycle of writing, then giving up, then writing, then giving up again. And this carried on for years. In between, I did get a degree, because at that time I was faced with the choice to either study or get married, and so I chose the former. I did get married, but that's a whole story in itself. Back then, I never really spoke with anybody about my writing, out of fear of being ridiculed or being told that I would never make it because I'm clearly not good enough. And my stories were very, very private to me as well. But then in 2017, something changed inside me. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe it was just growing older. Um, but that was probably the first time. that I made a commitment to myself that one way or another I was going to finish at least one story. I started telling some friends that I write stories, but I was careful in who I told since I still had this fear of being ridiculed. It later became quite apparent to me that I really needed to do a course in creative writing, but by that time I was raising a family and no longer working, so I couldn't really justify spending money and time on something that I guess was largely viewed as a hobby. But it wasn't just the money. I think the thought of doing a class with a whole load of people who I had already decided were going to be much better than I could ever be, that prospect was just too scary. It was just the crippling social anxiety that was at play there. So for a few years, I just carried on writing. Um, I tried to learn about the different components that go into creating or writing a novel or a story. Watched videos on YouTube and the internet. It was an incredibly steep learning curve for me, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed. But at the same time, I found that a lot of information was going totally above my head. Um, it was technical terms like story arc and character arc, and the differences between them, and largely live writing about emotions. Um, I listened to countless YouTube videos and interviews with screenwriters and tips for writing novels, and there is so much information out there that I got overwhelmed by it all. It was like taking a walk through the marketplace and everybody shouting at you all at the same time. I soon started losing confidence in myself again, thinking perhaps I'm not clever enough. I'm just too stupid to learn any of this, really. I thought that there are millions of best-selling authors out there with beautiful and compelling stories and characters. The world doesn't really need me or my story. So I resigned myself to this for a while until I came across an interview of an expert in his field, and the way he explained the story structure, the character arc, and the story arc, all of that together, it just suddenly clicked. I cannot tell you how elated I was. It felt like someone had switched on the light and everything I had been learning over the past few years was laid out right in front of me. I feel that I've made the most progress in the past year than in my entire life. And I finally feel like I'm in the driver's seat. In terms of my in terms of my story writing journey, I would say that I'm roughly at the midpoint. Everything that I've learned so far, all of the changes that have happened in me, I can't really go back from here, which is why they call this the point of no return, which means that I haven't hit my major setback yet. The dark moment of the story where the hero, or in my case the heroine, has to find extra resources, either externally or internally, is still to come. I guess this story is still unfolding. But you want to know the strangest thing? I am also about halfway through my novel. Now I don't write in a linear way, so I'm literally all over the place. So I've actually written my major setback, the climax, the ending, the beginning, everything. And I've got all of the main points or the beats. I'm in the process of just adding the details to flesh out my novel. Now, looking at it from a different perspective, you could say that my midpoint was actually the time when I committed to finishing my novel, which would then make my major setback the time I lost confidence in myself, when I couldn't understand the technical terms of writing. And indeed, at that time, I almost gave up writing altogether. In which case, my resolution is going to be me actually publishing my novel one day, God willing. So you may ask, how do you know which one is the midpoint? Well, that all depends on the story that you're telling and on your character's goal within that story. The story skeleton, the story structure is like a skeleton, a framework, if you like, which you then flesh out with your own details, your characters, your plot, your setting, etc., etc. So this is what has brought me here today. I come before you all facing two of my biggest fears, social anxiety and fear of failure, because I feel compelled to share my story and what I've learned so far in the hope that it helps at least one person out there. I hope that you'll join me and become a part of my story by giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel and hitting the bell button as well. Feel free to leave comments and questions. I really do look forward to hearing from you. I always welcome constructive feedback on how to improve, but please be kind when doing this. So thank you for watching, everyone, and see you in my next video. Till then, stay safe and keep smiling. God bless. Bye.